Alright guys, so literally like half of all the questions on my videos recently have been around the same topic, which is kind of which characters should I summon out of the festive trio, should I go for dupes on them, or should I save up for future characters such as SP Hoshimi Korra instead. Now, there are just far too many comments similar to this, so rather than answering everyone one by one, I'm just gonna do this video today and try to address all of the topic together, okay? Now, just to clarify, there's no right or wrong answers. What you want to do is very much down to yourself, your own account, which character do you actually like, what kind of team you want to build, and also most importantly, how much resources do you actually have, okay? But the way I'm gonna try to answer your questions will be kind of talking about the logic behind it, so that depending on your own situation, you can come up to the right answer yourself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each of those three characters one by one. And the way I want you guys to think about it is that think about like, I know a character is quite complicated. There are lots of different skills. They cover lots of different things, but boil down to the main mechanics that they're able to bring onto the table. And also, are there any alternative character you can do instead for those kind of mechanics? And maybe what you want to do realize is that actually what you don't like is what you like is not so much the character itself, but actually what it's able to bring to a team. And if there's actually alternative for it, then you may want to consider, do you actually want to skip this character in order to actually summon for the alternative instead, okay? So that's kind of how I want you guys to look at this topic, okay? So I'm going to start off with the characters one by one, starting off with Oikawa. He's able to do main two things in his mechanic. Number one is that he is able to bring a huge amount of awareness to your team. However, from awareness point of view, there are actually loads of characters able to do that. Purely from the setup perspective, for example, Akashi can also give a huge amount of awareness boost to the spiker, and also in the future, Kageyama, SP Kageyama is also able to make sure your team setting, and also spiker going to be crit, okay? So from just making sure your whole team crit perspective, sure, Oracle is very good at that, but he's definitely not the only one capable of doing so. So if that's the only thing you want to summon for Oikawa, then do bear in mind there are going to be alternative to that. Then the second thing that Oikawa is able to do is that he's able to give huge amount of buff to just one single character onto your team, the one who's diagonal opposite to him. Now this is very strong, however how good or how effective that will be for a team is going to depend on how useful that character who is facing opposite Oikawa is going to be like. Because for example, vast majority of the time you want him to be facing towards Spiker because all of the buff he provides are offensive buff, or majority of the buff are offensive buffs. However, let's say if you actually have 3 different spikers who you'll be rotating with the spikes around, then in those kinds of situations, how important is it actually to concentrate off the buff on just one of those 3 spikers? Obviously, it may not actually be that effective. Whereas on the other hand, if you don't have one character who will be doing all of the spikes for you, just spamming spike every single time, then obviously the value of Oikawa is going to be a lot higher. So, in order to think about whether or not Oikawa actually brings anything to your team composition, you now actually have to take a look at your spiking options. How many spikers do you actually plan to have on your team? And is the fact that Oikawa able to significantly buff one of them actually make it worthwhile? Or is a better alternative actually just to bring a different setter who was not able to provide such a big, huge buff? However, that would be to your whole team, and therefore all 3 of your spikers will be benefiting from that, right? So that's the second thing you have to bear in mind when considering whether or not you want to summon for Oikawa. Now the next character is going to be SP Iwaizumi, and his main mechanic that he's able to bring to a team is the fact that he essentially acts as a receiving liberal, in the sense that he actually have a receiving skill which he can spam, and also have very high skill multiplier, which is even higher than some of the liberals out there. Now, in terms of thinking whether or not he's worth summoning for this mechanic, you have to bear in mind once again what are going to be the alternative. If you're actually looking for a like-for-like comparison, in the sense that you also want a Wind Spiker who can spam ultimate receives, etc., then the only comparison you can make for him is going to be SP Hoshiyumi. If you actually plan to build him with a receiving build, and even then for him to actually spam his receive, you also need to have him as skill in the full, and also play alongside with Hiragami, okay? So from that perspective, if you just want to exact replicate to what Iwaizumi is able to do, it could be quite hard. However, the easiest way of replicating this mechanic that Iwaizumi is able to bring is simply just to have a liberal on your team, right? And in fact, if you actually compare it, what a liberal is able to do versus what Iwaizumi is able to do, what you then realize is that if you are actually able to make sure your liberal, depending on your team rotation, rotation, etc. If you're actually able to make sure your liberal is going to be there, no matter what your rotation is going to be, then your liberal can be on the back receiving for the entire duration of the match. Whereas for in the case of Iwaizumi, because he's a wing spiker, he's one of the main 6 players that will be rotating around. Very realistically, Iwaizumi can only be on the court for about 60 or 70% of the time, depending on your rotation goals. And if he's actually then rotated to the front, you may actually end up lacking a good receiving character at the back. Okay, so from that perspective, the main reason why you may want to summon for Iwaizumi is going to be mainly down to the reason that you, first of all, either don't have a liberal, or because of the team composition, you can't really fit in your liberal onto a team without screwing up your own rotation, etc. Okay, so those are kind of the main reason why you may want to summon for Iwaizumi, and also the alternative you can do instead if you don't summon for him. And now lastly, it's going to be Ushijima, whether or not you want to summon for him. Now for Ushijima, his main mechanic is the fact that he can actually spam his spike, and in order to do that, he is going to require his skill resistance too. Okay, so unlike Iwaizumi and also Oikawa, I would say they are comfortable even without any dupes. If you plan to have Ushijima, you absolutely need to get him to skill resistance too, okay, because that's the only way where he's actually able to spam his spike. Now if you want a cheap budget alternative for that, it's going to be in the SSR section, which is going to be Aaron Ojira. In fact, I don't even have him here. It's going to be Aaron Ojira. He is also capable of spamming spikes because his ultimate only have a cooldown of 2 net crossing. Okay, so there's definitely a cheap alternative to Ushijima if you don't actually want to summon for him. And then the other alternative a lot of people are talking about is also going to be Hoshimi Korai. However, with Hoshimi Korai, even if you get him to skill resistance full and also play SP Hiragami, he can still not spam his spike. Okay, he can only do it once every 4 net crossing. So that basically means that he can basically do every other spike. However, he won't be able to spam every single time. So that's kind of why Ushijima is going to fall in kind of this situation where he's going to be slightly better than Aaron Ojiro. However, and also spike a lot more frequently than SP Hoshimi Korai. However, whether or not that's worth it or not, it's going to be down to your own preference in terms of what do you want to do with it. Just bear in mind, in order for this to happen, you absolutely need him to be at skill resistance 2. Okay, and then the other point I will also want to bring out for SP Ushijima is the fact that once you have him at skill resistance 2, his main selling point is the fact that he is going to be the only spiker on your team. So now if you're actually planning to summon for him, you also have to bear in mind what character do you already have on your team, because let's say if you already have those of other good spikers, the fact that you're putting for Ushijima also means that you no longer need to play those other spikers. So would they have already been investment that you have made in the past but now going down to the drains because you won't even be using that anymore? And if you're not using your existing spikers, what other characters are you going to be playing instead now that you are actually going to have Ushijima? Do you actually have enough good supporters to actually bring onto the team instead of those current slots which are currently occupied by your existing spikers, right? So those are all of the things you have to consider. And like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. It's going to be mainly down to how your account looks right now, and also, like I said, how much resources do you actually have? Because remember, if you actually want to play him, you absolutely need to get him to skill resistance 2. Okay, so that's going to be a quick rundown of whether or not you want to summon for each one of them. Hopefully this video helped you to actually think about objectively from your own account perspective whether or not those characters actually make sense from your team composition. And now the other question I also get a lot of people ask is that, should I go for dupes on them? Like I said, Ushijima need minimum skill resistance 2. As for Oikawa and Iwaizumi, you don't necessarily have to go on dupes for them. Dupes are obviously going to be good for them, right? A dupe on any character is always going to be good. However, it doesn't really change the main way you'll be playing them. So whether or not you want to spend dupes on them is very much down to how much resources do you actually have. Especially, let's say, if you're also planning to get certain characters in the future, then you may also have to set aside some of your gems for those future characters. And then in those kind of cases, you may actually want to walk backwards to say, let's say, for example, if you also plan to summon for Hoshimi and also Hiragami, that's how much X amount of gems I just set aside for them. And now if I walk backwards, am I able to spend all of my existing resources for the characters right now, or do I need to save some aside just so that I have enough to summon for the future characters? Okay, so once again, that's going to be down to your own future summoning plans, but you just need to work backwards to see how much resources can you actually afford to spend on the existing school festival banners. But like I said, for Oikawa and the Iwaizumi, they don't necessarily need to have dupes. But for SP Ushijima, if you are going to play him, absolutely need skill resistance too.